We're talking about our stories and the greater story that can overcome the smaller stories of our story and my story. And my life has been a life of miracles, and the greater story has intruded upon it many a time, not necessarily to my extreme comfort at the time. Probably the biggest story I have of the greater story being greater than the horrible human story, which could have kept me locked in there. My first husband was Henry Barley. He was born in Birmingham, which is where I was born, but I met him in China when I was filming Manchuria Express for Channel 4. That was back in 1988. You can find the documentary here on YouTube if you want to. I have lots of curly 1980s sort of hair. Anyway, Henry died 1 year and 16 days after our marriage. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer 5 months after we got married. And at his deathbed, the hospital chaplain told me that Henry, as an atheist, could not go to heaven. Now, at the time, that felt immeasurably cruel, and it added to my grief and my pain. But I got really stubborn about it because that's the way I'm built. Some people might have gone off into atheism. Somebody may have been locked into the it's not fair aspect. But I was a journalist, and I started investigating. I wanted to know what Jesus had actually said. How could a Christian say that? What kind of man was Jesus? What did he actually teach? Because up until that point, I had been what you might call an armchair Christian. I'd turned up at Christmas sometimes, certainly as a child, sometimes as an adult. Occasionally, if I needed a bit of help or guidance, I might show up at a church. Sometimes went at Easter, but not really. And I would write Church of England if it was required on a form, but I never really thought about it. And it really never bothered me that Henry was an atheist either. But that hospital chaplain was an angel, because he changed my life forever. I would not be standing here talking to you if it hadn't been for Henry's death and that hospital chaplain, because it was in the search for meaning, for the greater truth, for something bigger than this idea that you're not a Christian so you don't go to heaven, that has brought me to Kabbalah. And I also got involved with a Jewish man who was the pathway, who took me into Kabbalah. And through Judaism, I came to learn who Jesus was, his background, and it's what made me the minister, the ordained minister that I am today. Another story, the greater story, is very relevant for right now, which is August 2021 when I'm filming this. This is when the great pro-vaccination, anti-vaccination debate or squabble or outright war is going on. And again, these are polarised. It's either it's all bad or it's all good. And I mentioned at the very beginning, I think, that I was vaccine hesitant. And the reason for that was many, many years ago, when I was first married to Henry, I had the trial shingles vaccination. In those days, it was known as the herpes vaccination, and Henry had genital herpes. I can tell you that now because he's been gone a long time and it's not going to embarrass anybody. Anyway, I'd never even had chickenpox, so I should never have had shingles. But I went for the trial vaccination. Back in those days, I didn't have any holistic knowledge, and I didn't know about promoting my own immune system. I didn't know about the bigger picture. I had the vaccination, and 3 weeks later I had really serious shingles. It completely engulfed my middle area. I was very lucky it wasn't on my face. I know that's awful. And if you've ever had shingles, you will know that it is horrendous. It really is not a very nice disease to have. My father and I were going on a tour to South America, and I had shingles. I put great big pads of lint strapped on around my waist, because if you've had shingles, you know that the slight touch of clothing, especially in a hot climate, drives you crazy. So I was all bandaged up. And my dad and I were travelling alone at the particular point I'm talking about. We were taking what's known as a collectivo, which is a shared taxi from the town of Huancayo over the Andes, to go back to Lima, where we were staying. And in the collectivo, there was a man who started getting very agitated, and it got to the point where he got out of the car and ran away. 2 corners later, the car was held up by armed militia. These were boys, 17, 18, 19, 20, with great big guns. I don't know if they were official. I have no idea where they came from. My Spanish was not very good in those days. But anyway, they held us all up and they had our hands up. They were searching us down and they were looking in our luggage. And I believe they were looking for the guy who'd run away and they were looking for drugs. Now, back in those days, my father was a walking pharmaceutical case, really. Doctors then would give you antibiotics and whatever you needed if you were travelling to the other end of the world where you couldn't necessarily get medical equipment. So my dad had got a whole load of drugs in his briefcase. And these men, these militia, were very suspicious about it. They had the two of us up against the car with our hands over. I was the only girl there. And I was scared. There's no doubt about it. I was scared. I could have experienced rape. We could have been murdered. We could have been arrested. We had no idea and no redress. And then, when I was saying, God help me, a voice. There's always a voice. It was just basically, you've got shingles. And the first reaction is, yeah, my life's hard enough as it is, thank you very much. And then they went, ah! So I turned gently round and I signalled to the young men, may I show you something? They could see I had no weapon in my hands and I wasn't wearing clothing that could hide anything particularly. So I pulled up my top and showed them the bandages and pulled them up so they saw the shingles. They took one look and ran away. So even though I've had shingles since, and I don't like shingles, it's entirely possible that the vaccination that gave me that disease also saved my life. And I'm going to choose to look at it that way. I was vaccine hesitant. I'm still vaccine hesitant. I don't really want things in my body that I don't know about. However, I'm always going to look at the bigger picture, the wider picture. It's not just my tribe's story. It's not just my story. It's the bigger story. What is appropriate in the bigger story today? How can I be of service today? Only I know that. I, with God, can know what my place in the world is today. But the wonderful thing is that when you have got that connection, when you sit and say, like St. Francis did, who are you, God, and who am I? Who are you, God, and who am I? There comes a point in contemplation or meditation of complete connection, and you know that you are loved, seen, heard, and worthy. And I cannot tell you the depth of the tears that will come at that moment.